You're watching Race to Power. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. On the show today, we deep dive into the potential trade and/or military battle between United States and Europe as Donald Trump doubles down on his threats. We also talk about Japan, where Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has called for snap elections in February this year with an aim to consolidate her support. But there are some challenges that she must overcome. We get you all about it, but first, let's turn our focus to Greenland. The Greenland tussle between America and Europe is only getting deeper. President Donald Trump has threatened tariffs on European allies, while Europe is now scrambling to avert those duties. It is also considering potential countermeasures. This may include a measure that many are calling a trade bazooka. Donald Trump has reiterated his intention on Greenland. He's claimed that Denmark has not been able to do anything to get the Russian threat away from Greenland, also adding that now it is time and it will be done. Trump has been citing the threat from Russia as justification for his demand to take over Greenland. But ironically, Moscow almost seems to be egging Trump on. Kremlin spokesperson declined to comment on whether Trump's takeover of Greenland would be good or bad, or even in line with international law. But he's added that if Trump solves the issue of Greenland's takeover, he's sure to go down in history. It seems Russia is trying not to get dragged into the Greenland debate, and European countries are facing the heat for trying to increase security there. Denmark and 7 other European countries have boosted their military presence in Greenland recently. They hoped that it would assuage fears over the island's security. But instead, the move has invited a threat of tariffs. Trump said that he would impose the 10% levy on goods coming in from these 8 countries until a deal is reached for the purchase of Greenland. Leaders from the targeted countries have started speaking out now.
Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance. Nor is it helpful to frame efforts to strengthen Greenland's security as a justification for economic pressure.
There is broad consensus among Europeans that further threats of tariffs will weaken rather than strengthen transatlantic relations. They also carry the risk of escalation. Customs duties are usually paid by those in the country where the imports are received, in this case, American consumers.
Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs triggered an emergency meeting of the European Union ambassadors. At the meeting, the envoys reached a broad agreement to intensify efforts to dissuade Trump from imposing tariffs, but it also called for preparing retaliatory measures should the duties go ahead. Now, reports say that the French President Emmanuel Macron has asked the European Union to activate its so-called anti-coercion instrument, sometimes referred to as a trade bazooka. The anti-coercion instrument has never been used so far. It could limit access to public tenders, investments, or banking activity, or restrict trade in services. Reports state that EU leaders are also considering a package of tariffs worth $107 billion of American imports. The package was prepared last year but suspended after the trade deal with Trump. Sources say that the tariff package appeared to command broader support as a first response than anti-coercion measures. European Union leaders are set to convene an emergency meeting this Thursday as well. Another report claims that Germany could significantly increase the rent that America pays to use military facilities on its territory. The Times reported that while Germany is not considering the closure of American military bases on its territory, it may make the American presence in Europe more costly. The United States Army has over 40 military installations in Germany, including the Ramstein Air Base that houses the NATO-allied Air Command. Will these moves deter Trump, or will they anger him further? Well, either way, Europe seems caught between a rock and a hard place, and Brussels' next move could risk blowing this crisis further. All right, joining me on Race to Power today is Klisman Murati. He is an economist and founder of Pareto Economics, a global world affairs research consultancy. Klisman, good evening. Thanks very much for speaking with us at WION. I want to start by asking you how are you looking at this entire situation? Are you looking at it as a potential trade war between America and Europe, or you're not ruling out the possibility of military intervention and therefore military confrontation between NATO allies?
I think Europe would be in a stronger position if they didn't have to rely so much on the US for helping them with Ukraine. But given that Europe is already fighting a war on its eastern front, having something open up on its northwestern front is going to be extra pressure on the bloc to both work with Trump and also fight against him at the same time, which is quite schizophrenic in this international relations sphere we have today. So the Europe really needs to think now, what can it do to deter this? Because the measures that it has in place is more likely to have Trump do something more extreme on top to fight these measures that Europe is thinking of imposing. So what Europe wants to do is effectively sanction in these ways Trump for his actions. But I don't think this is going to change the picture in the slightest for President Trump. He has had his eye set on Greenland from the first day he got into power. But he's had other things on his mind, other policy objectives to achieve. And now it's Greenland's turn to take center stage for him. So he's obviously operating on rules which isn't agreed upon by his counterparts in Europe. But it's really in the court of Europe as to what they do next. But anything they do, I think, will escalate this.
Which is, absolutely right when you say that now the ball is, of course, in the European Union's court. But do you think that the EU can stand up to America? Do you think that the European Union has it in them to economically and militarily stand against the United States of America and Donald Trump?
In short, no, because over the last 40-odd years, Europe's success in its commerce, in its defense, and in its innovation has come in a large part from the United States. They sell into the United States more than they sell into any other market apart from its own. And they rely on the US for defense. They work with US technology partners, and a lot of US firms employ European workers in different sectors. And they are protected, and they are in line with the US agenda on the world, at least until the last few months. So because they've entangled themselves so much and been more of a recipient of US progress as opposed to it being on an equal basis, they are going to find it very difficult to stand up against him, because what can they do that doesn't hurt them, number one, but hurts the United States as well? That is an equation that never works out well, because they haven't developed themselves independently of the US in any major way over the last 40-odd years. So this entanglement has led them to being such close partners, but this also has caused them to be at big risk, because Trump has a very different view on world affairs than his past administrations, and this is going to cause a lot of pressure for the Europeans moving forward.
So it's almost like a wake-up call for Europe as well, who've been, stagnant economies since the past few years. But if there is a potential trade war between Europe and America, how do you think consumers like you and I would be impacted?
No, it's not going to be good, is it? I mean, it's quite easy maths if you think about the equations. If there are barriers to trade in any given way, then the end consumer is the one that suffers. Inflation goes up in different ways. Unemployment potentially also increases. That means interest rates have to be changed. That means the whole forecast for a country's economic viability in 2026, 27 is going to change. And this is all dependent upon what measures each party takes in this, and not to consider a third actor or a sort of a black swan event or circumstance that can arise in this whole coalition of confusion, I think you'd call it. Because right now it's the US and Europe, but as things go down into the future, maybe with such focus that Europe is paying on both sides of its continent, there could be an opportunity to take advantage of Europe on a third side. So Europe is really at risk here. Their people are at risk, and the economic viability and sustainability of Europe's growth is also at risk.
All right, we'll leave it there. Hopefully, the World Economic Forum will see some sort of stable negotiations coming in. Hopefully, that is, one can only hope with Donald Trump. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Klisman, for joining us and giving us your perspective.
Thank you.
Well, ahead of Donald Trump's appearance at this year's World Economic Forum, protests have broken out in Davos over his presence. Hundreds of people took to the streets bearing placards like "Stop Trump, No WEF," even as the US president makes his first appearance at the event in 6 years. Weighing in on the protests, Young Socialists, Switzerland's Vice President Nathalie Roos stressed that it was unacceptable for the World Economic Forum to host leaders like Trump. She alleged that the WEF is catering to the interests of the most powerful people of the world instead of the general population and their interests.
If you look at the guest list, we have, for example, Trump, that is at the World Economic Forum this year, and we feel like it is unacceptable of the World Economic Forum, but also of Switzerland in general, to host fascists like Donald Trump, because that also kind of legitimizes their actions.
And our correspondent Dharamjot Kaur is in Davos. She's been tracking all the developments that are taking place ahead of Trump's visit there. Take a look at this report that she has sent in.
2 days of protests unfolded here at the World Economic Forum, Davos. And this is a protest that began with a march on Saturday. About 600 to 700 people gathered here at this very location protesting against the forum overall, but it was intense this time because of one person who was supposed to visit in a couple of days. We're talking about US President Donald Trump. Now, this entire agitation was primarily against Trump for several reasons. One of them being where they chanted, calling the American president as a dictator. Now, a lot of these protests are not happening for the first time. The World Economic Forum has often witnessed marches and rallies of this nature before as well. And majorly, the focus of that protest and that demonstration has been how the entire forum, the summit, is moving away from what its original vision has always been. The entire protest has hinged on the fact that there is more pro-capitalist approach to the entire summit and less of an approach towards a globalized and more equitable transfer of not just resources, but also other avenues. Does that protest really amount to something? We've seen it happen year on year. We've seen it happen this time too. It needs to be seen whether these voices are heard, or will the state leaders, especially the American president, do and say as they please. With video journalist Neeraj here at Davos, this is Dharamjot Kaur for WION World is One.
Well, let's shifting our focus to Japan now, where Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has called for a snap election on the 8th of February. Takaichi has officially announced plans to dissolve Japan's parliament this week because she's seeking a stronger mandate for her fiscal and defense policies. This is, remember, Takaichi's first electoral test since becoming Japan's first female prime minister in October last. She now plans to dissolve the parliament on the 23rd of January and then have a snap vote for all 465 seats in the lower house of Japan's parliament.
I stake my position as Prime Minister on this decision. I ask the people of Japan to directly judge whether they can entrust the governance of the nation to Sanai Takaichi.
Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, or the LDP, has governed the country almost uninterrupted for decades. Takaichi was appointed the Prime Minister in October, and her cabinet is riding high in the polls for now, despite the party's flagging popularity overall. Her ruling bloc, which includes the Japan Innovation Party as a coalition partner, currently holds only a slim majority in Japan's lower house. Takaichi's cabinet recently approved a record $768 billion USD budget for the fiscal year starting April 2026. She says swift parliamentary approvals is the need of the hour to tackle inflation and support the world's fourth largest economy. However, opposition parties argue that dissolving the parliament risks delaying urgent economic measures. The main opposition parties, Komeito and the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, have agreed to join forces to fight Takaichi in the election. The snap poll, remember, comes less than 18 months after the previous lower house election held in October 2024. Under Japan's constitution, members of the House of Representatives serve 4-year terms unless the chamber is dissolved earlier. Let's turn our attention now to Bangladesh. After weeks of intense scrutiny over the murders of Hindu minorities in the country, Bangladesh has now released a report claiming that only one person was murdered for communal reasons. The country claims that most of the incidents involving members of the minority communities were criminal in nature, but did not have a communal angle. Bangladesh's chief advisor, Mohammad Yunus, put out this report on his official social media handles. The report stated that 645 incidents involving members of minority communities took place in 2025, but only 71 of them had a communal angle. Yunus claims that just one person from the minority community was murdered because of their religion last year. He says the other 70 communally charged incidents involved temple vandalism or arson and other situations, such as threats to break idols, threatening social media posts, and damage to worship pavilions. On the other hand, 574 criminal incidents involving minorities were attributed to non-communal factors. This included explanations such as prior enmity and land or neighborhood disputes. Yunus has insisted that according to the data, most crimes involving victims from minorities were not driven by communal hostility. Since the 18th of December last year, remember, regular reports have been emerging of Hindus being killed in Bangladesh. 18th of December was when the 25-year-old garment factory worker Deepu Chandra Das was lynched over alleged blasphemy. According to the Bangladesh Hindu-Buddhist Christian Unity Council, there were 51 cases of communal violence in Bangladesh in December 2025 alone. And this trend has continued into January 2026 with the hacking to death of 40-year-old Moni Chakrabarti and several other killings of Hindu minorities. The Indian government recently raised concerns over these murders and the Bangladeshi interim government's tendency to lay the blame on non-communal reasons.
To witness a disturbing pattern of recurring attacks on minorities that you referred, as well as their homes and establishments, business establishments by extremists in Bangladesh. Such communal incidents need to be dealt with swiftly and firmly. We have also observed a troubling tendency to attribute such incidents to personal rivalries, personal vendettas, political differences, and other extraneous reasons. Such disregard only emboldens the extremists and the perpetrators of such crimes and deepens the sense of fear and insecurity among the minority.
The Bangladesh Hindu-Buddhist Christian Unity Council has warned that attacks on minorities could escalate in the run-up to the elections on the 12th of February. But despite these concerns from both Bangladesh's minorities and from India, it seems that the Yunus-led interim administration has chosen to double down on its strategy of downplaying the attacks on minorities. Moving on, Vietnam's most important political conclave is underway. The Communist Party of Vietnam is holding its National Congress. This Congress is held once in every 5 years, and its purpose is to decide on Vietnam's course over the next 5 years. This also means choosing the people who will lead the country. Remember, Vietnam is a single-party state. The Communist Party of Vietnam allows no opposition. But almost 1,600 party delegates have arrived in the capital, Hanoi, to choose their next leaders. The delegates will first elect a 200-member Central Committee. This committee will then decide on the composition of Vietnam's Politburo, the 17 to 19 people who will make up the country's most powerful governing body. And the country's top leadership will be chosen from among those Politburo members. Vietnam's most powerful politician isn't the president or the prime minister. The highest office in this country is that of General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. Currently, that role is served by Tu Lam. He took over the post in August 2024. after his predecessor died in office. Before becoming General Secretary, Tu Lam served as the President of Vietnam for a few months, and before that he was the country's Minister of Public Security. As Security Minister, Tu Lam oversaw a massive crackdown on corruption. His crusade led to the downfall of 6 former Politburo members, including 2 former presidents. That helped pave the way for Tu Lam's elevation to the presidential post and then the General Secretary job in 2024. Now, reports say that Tu Lam is expected to be confirmed as the General Secretary for a full 5-year term during this National Congress. But he allegedly wants even more power. Reports say that he seeks to be both party General Secretary and the President at the same time. That would be a consolidation of power and mimic the Chinese system under Xi Jinping. Now, if this happens, Tu Lam will arguably become Vietnam's most powerful leader since Ho Chi Minh. Vietnam's National Congress is scheduled to end on the 25th of January. That's when the world will know its new leadership structure and also its 5-year plan for economic growth.
As a young person, I hope that as the country enters a new era, the leaders will introduce policies that help promote human development and economic growth.
As a young person, I hope the new leadership will help the country continue to develop with improved living standards and stronger growth in tourism.
By the time the Congress concludes, Vietnam is expected to announce its economic targets over the next half-decade. Reports say that the Congress will declare a target of 10% annual GDP growth over the next 5 years, and people across the country are waiting to find out who will lead them towards that ambitious goal. Shifting our focus now to Portugal, where the country is headed for a presidential runoff after elections on the 18th of January threw up an inconclusive result. None of the 11 candidates secured an outright majority in the first round of voting on Sunday. 11 million Portuguese people went to the polls to choose the successor to the outgoing president, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. After the first round, centre-left socialist candidate Antonio José Seguro emerged on top with over 31% of the vote. In his victory speech, Seguro called the result a win for democracy, pledging to defeat extremism in the second round.
I have returned to unite the Portuguese people. I will never be a president who pits one section of the Portuguese people against another. Never.
While Seguro led nationally far-right leader and former sports TV commentator André Ventura came a close second, Ventura delivered a strong performance in this election, representing Portugal's conservative populist party, Chega. His controversial anti-establishment campaign allegedly spread xenophobic ideas and focused heavily against what he calls excessive immigration.
I do not want a return to socialism in Portugal. Socialism destroys, socialism kills, socialism corrupts, and I do not want socialism in Portugal.
Seguro and Ventura will now face off in a decisive second round on the 8th of February. In the 5 decades of Portugal's democratic history, this will be only the second presidential showdown. It is also the first time a far-right candidate has advanced or even edged close to the second round of the presidential race. Although the Portuguese presidency is largely ceremonial, the office carries significant powers in times of crisis, including the ability to veto legislation, dissolve the parliament, and call for snap elections. The runoff will test whether Portugal's long dominant political centre can hold against the rising far right. And with that, it's time to wrap this edition of Race to Power. But as always on WION, we'll keep getting you stories from across the world. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bye-bye.
This is our brand new edition of South India, a daily dynamic show that will capture the pulse of the southern Indian state.
By blending special stories, stories of the day, breaking alerts and cultural vignettes.
From the 7 days.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at YoOne.com.
From the Swiss Alps